Last week, we had discussed the microscopic structures of the muscle. We took apart the muscle. We looked at the muscle fibers. We looked at myosin actin and all that stuff and how it all worked and how it all orchestrated beautifully to be able to do the thing that you do. Now, this week, we're going to be talking more about macroscopic stuff, the stuff that we can see with the naked eye, and how it all works. How does the physics work to make us do what we do? Let's use the upper limb as an example and to lead off in our discussion. First off, let's just talk anatomy. We got ourselves a belly of the muscle. That's actually where the muscle tissue is. We're looking at the biceps and triceps here, by the way, biceps being the one in the front, triceps being in the back. Biceps having that belly on the front, again, the triceps on the back. With these bellies of these muscles, of the triceps and biceps, eventually leading off into this white tissue stuff here that's called a tendon. These tendons, if you recall from AMP1, are that dense regular connective tissue running in one particular direction that gives it that extra tensile strength in that particular direction. We then will give a little bit more of a description of what these tendons are and where they are going in and how they help produce that movement. There are two forms of or places that are given nomenclature, and this nomenclature right now is kind of outdated. There's a debate whether or not we should continue using it because of how confusing it is, but right now there isn't really a replacement out there, so we're probably going to be sticking around with this stuff for a little bit longer. It's that of origin versus insertion. Origin is the part of the muscle or where that tendon is inserting into a bone that will not be moving. In this case, we're moving our elbow joint down here. This joint and where these origins are stationary. They do not move. They are your anchor. The other part where you're actually going to see the joint move, or in this case, the elbow joint move, and the bones that they're associated with is called the insertion point. So origin, stationary. These bones aren't moving. Insertion, the bones move. Now, how they move is via something called a leverage system. You probably all have thought of this once upon a time: opening a door, flushing a toilet, playing seesaw even, are all considered a type of leverage system. Pulleys and a lot of your other things in this world work via a leverage system, and that's true of our body too. Of a leverage system, there are three main factors. There has to be a fulcrum point, a point where it bends and moves. There has to be an effort. It could be something pulling. In this case, it's muscles. Your muscles are pulling, and your muscles only pull on things. Muscles never push or uncontract to do its effort and its job. It's always shortening. That's how muscles work. They have to shorten in order to do their job. In order to put in an effort, they must shorten. Or contract is probably the more appropriate term. I do apologize. And in that case, in this system or in this description, that work that is done is called an effort. And that effort is there to move a load, whether it be something, in this case, is the upper limb again. It's a load, let's say that you have a banana or an orange or something here in your hand, and you're going to offer it to somebody, but your hands droop down to the side in an anatomical position. You go ahead and work in that biceps, and you bring it up and offer it to somebody, and that becomes your load. Now, you don't have to have something in your hand to make your hand a load. Your biceps is still working to lift up your humerus, not your humerus, your ulna, your radius, and your bones of your hand to get them up to where they need to be, including all the muscles and tissues associated with your lower limb, or the distal portion of your upper limb. There are three different types of levers. There's a first class, second class, third class. How we identify them is just interchanging the positions of the effort, fulcrum, and the load. First class, you have the effort on one side of the fulcrum. and the load on the other side of the fulcrum. This one is giving you a picture of some scissors. Another awesome example would be that of playing teeter-totter. One kid on one side and another kid on the other doing an effort on a fulcrum point. In your body, the first class is your head, and it's one of the very few examples in your body that is a first class action. The second class lever system puts the effort and the load right by each other, but the effort is furthest away from the fulcrum. The only really example that I can think of at this point is that here that they're demonstrating here, the effort being done by the muscles in the back of your lower limb with the load, your humerus, and all your body weight being placed on this point right here, and the fulcrum when you're going tippy-toe, well, almost tippy-toe, taking a step forward, being the fulcrum point, the part that is actually bending. Your third class reorganizes it just one more time, except for the load is the furthest one away. So it's a fulcrum, effort, and then load. This one, if you've done physics, if you've played around with levers and systems, you'll know that the third class is not the most efficient way of doing things. It is very hard. This is easy to demonstrate by you walking around holding onto a box. If you have the box nice and close to you, it's much easier to hold. It's much easier to keep it close to keep moving. If you have the load way far out, you've extended your arms out. This isn't a true example of a second versus third class, forgive me, but this is more of a physics example. If you have that load way out there, it's much harder to hold on to that load longer. Some old school punishments really take advantage of this little physics principle. You fill a couple of buckets of water. If somebody really gets on your nerves, you fill up a couple of buckets of water, and then you tell them to abduct their arms out and hold it there for a while. If they adduct their arms, it's not going to end very well. The punishment restarts. That's the same thing with this type of thing. If you have the load closer to the fulcrum point, or if you have that load closer to that fulcrum point, it's much easier to deal with. That's why that second class lever works so nicely, like a wheelbarrow. Now, how do you determine effort, load, and fulcrum and the organization of those points? Well, if you're looking at this, let's look at the third class lever. There can be some confusion. You can kind of see, well, the E is up here, the F is here, and the L is here, but if we were to go ahead and put that into order by going from proximal to distal, this drawing makes it sound like and look like the effort comes first, and it should be an F or a first class. What you really need to take into account and how to do this is looking at where the insertion point of that effort is. So in this case, that insertion point for this biceps brachii is here on this radius, or at least that we can see right here, which means that E should really be indicating right here, so it should be an F-E-L. A lot of you like the little acronyms or mnemonics or something like that to help you remember these things. How I being that one person that does like using that. Here's how I remember the order of the classes and how they worked, is that remember first, second, third are all in order. And because we're now, or at least when I learned this or made this up, I was close to Christmas. So I saw Santa watching out his window and seeing an elf walking around with headphones in, and all of a sudden the elf not paying attention and falls down into a chasm. And Santa, being polite but also wanting to alert everyone, censored himself and said, "Ah, F, the elf fell." Ah, F, the elf fell. So first class F, Ethel, I'm removing the L. Elf, E-L-F, fell, F-E-L. First, second, third. The majority, by the way, really quick, one last thing about this particular slide. The majority of the setup that we have in our bodies is this third class. And it's, again, the least efficient, but hey, This is what we got. Let's go ahead and move on to our description of about the coordination within muscle groups really quick. If these fascicles, remember if you're going back to, I'm going to go to this picture to describe fascicles, remember that the fascicles are those cords and bundles of muscle fibers, all of which are usually running in the same direction. What happens though is that you're going to see within our body that some of these fascicles like to deviate from the norm. You can see that this biceps brachii is much wider and larger, and some of those fascicles aren't running in the same direction. Same thing going on here, and definitely here with these muscles in the back of the neck. Deviating these fascicles gives you a variety and wealth of power and strength behind those muscles. If they're all aligning in one specific way, you're going to have ultra power running in that one direction. But you can also deviate those or send those fascicles off into different directions. You'll lose some of that power in that one direction, but you also gain motion in other directions. These fascicles, or even muscles for that matter, but we're going to go ahead and relate it to muscles. There are muscles that work together, and there are muscles that don't work, that work against each other and work the opposite. Muscles that have the main power behind one's particular movement is called an agonist. So Batman is like the ultimate crime-fighting person. He is the agonist of our story. He is the good guy. He is the prime mover, and he has a synergist with him that's following behind him. Maybe not the strongest, maybe not the greatest, but there to support Batman and to make Batman go. Now, the muscle that does the exact opposite of Batman is called an antagonist. This is Joker here. Antagonist comes from anti-agonist. Anti means to be against. So this antagonist is anti-agonist. So your biceps and another muscle in your upper arm called the brachialis are working together, the biceps being the agonist and the brachialis being the synergist. While if you think about it, the back of your upper arm has the triceps, which will be the antagonist to the biceps brachii. Now that we've talked about the muscles, we're going to go ahead and refocus back down into the arrangement of the fascicles. These are all different ways that you will see these fascicles arranged. I've gone ahead and broken it down, make it a little bit easier. Those of you that have taken geometry will remember that parallel means lines that are running next to each other in the exact same direction, never to touch each other. Well, there is this going on here in a lot of different types of muscles. There's sternohyoid muscle. There's all these other muscles that we'll talk about later that have a parallel form. You got the fusiform that we talked about. You could see the biceps brachii is an excellent example of the fusiform muscle. Fusiform just means that if you notice if we compare the difference between the parallel and the fusiform, the parallel is nice and slim while the fusiform is nice and it's kind of bulking up a little bit. It's got some extra bundles going on there. These fascicles can also be oriented on itself with the tendons interacting with one another either side and forming a nice circle. If it's a circle, it's orbicularis. These fascicles can also be organized in a triangular pattern, meaning that these fascicles, these columns can help, again, remember if it's all in different directions, provides not as great of a strength, but more of a variety of movement. So this pectoralis major here can help move your arms in different ways because those fascicle bundles are arranged in different ways. The final description of the fascicle formation is something related that anatomists have decided to call it a pennate or feather-like. You got a uni, bi, and multi-pennate pennate, forgive me, muscles. And if we were to compare it to that of the feathers to help it really make sense, this is how it looks. Literally, you have a tendon running along almost the time, all the way along this muscle. When it's a unit pennate, it means that a bundle or a belly of that muscle is attaching underneath or directly to that tendon. If it's bipennate, bi means two. Bi equals two, 1, 2. You'll see muscle masses or fascicles joining into that one tendon on either side of that tendon. If it's multipennate, then you'll see multiple little feathers going into one tendon. Kind of like this grouse bump right here. We're going to go ahead and end on the how skeletal muscles are named, and then we'll go into the varying muscles and identify muscles that are important, some important characteristics of it. There are a number of ways that we use or descriptions that'll help us name things. Location is a huge one. You're going to see a lot in the head that uses location. Size, if there's several muscles in the same location but are a different size, then there will be like maximus, medius, minimus, or you can talk about the pectoralis major. We'll also have a pectoralis minor. Rhomboid major will have a rhomboid minor. The number of origins, that will explain to you your biceps. Appearance, again, that pennate, or does it look like a circle? Does it look like a triangle? That type of stuff. The directions of the fibers, is it a pennate? Is it all perfectly uniform? Is it parallel, or is it fusiform? Its origin and insertion, where does it insert? Where is its origin? Those locations are added into it. And then the muscle action, what does it do? Can all be a part or a way to help describe what that particular muscle does. Let's begin by describing the directions and then diving into sizes. Rectus being the one that's parallel to the midline, transverse being the perpendicular, just like the transverse plane, and oblique, if you remember back to AMP1 and the cross sections of the body, that oblique is the one that is weird. It's not perfectly transverse, it's not perfectly frontal or anterior or what have you, but it's kind of skiwampus, so it's an oblique. Size is thrown into it. Maximus, you can take a stab in the dark. That is, well, the largest. Minimus, well, it's pretty small. Longest being long, brevis being brief or short in this case. Latissimus being really, really, really wide. And longissimus being longest. Magnus, large, major, larger, minor, smaller, vastus, huge, or vast and expansive. You'll see those, and there'll be a few of those muscles that you will need to remember. Talking about shape, we got deltoid. Delta just refers to the three-sided triangle. The trapezius is basically you've bulked up a triangle and you've given it a fourth side. The serratus is the saw or saw teeth. It can serrate things. Rhomboid is diamond shape. If you remember our little circular discussion, orbicularis is anything that refers to a circle. Pectinate being your comb-like. Piriformis being pear-shaped, platus being flat, kind of like the platypus tail, quadratus being square, and gracilis being nice and slender. Again, actions were a huge, absolutely ginormous portion of a lot of the muscle names. We're not going to go into huge detail, but just because most of these names should sound very familiar from last session. Flexor means that you decrease the angle at the elbows or you invade in front of the body, and when you're doing anatomical position, and extension being going behind the plane of the body when you're in anatomical position. Abductor putting away the hands away from the body or midline. Adductor adding your limbs back to the midline. Levator elevating your body. Depressor depressing something. Supinator, pronator. Sphincters being an opening. Usually there's a couple of them, well, not usually, always a couple of them Rotator, I'm guessing you already know that. It rotates. Number of origins, triceps 2 origins, triceps 3 origins, quadriceps 4 origins, which there are quite a few different types of muscles. With that, that is the end of this video and the discussion of the names. We discussed what is an origin insertion. We discussed levers and things like that, as well as why certain names are given to certain types of muscles, the levator, pronator, all that stuff. With that, I hope you all do well, and remember, you got this.